Europe is reversing its approach to China, tightening rules on trade and investment and pushing back on Chinese tech. So, what's behind this change in policy towards one of the EU's biggest trading partners? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, Europe is stuck between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, pressure from the US to distance itself from Chinese tech and money. On the other, significant opportunities for trade and growth in China. So, how can European nations navigate this balance? Or will they have to pick a side?
Across Europe, governments are pushing back on Chinese technology and investments, citing security concerns and what they say are unfair business practices. EU leaders weren't shy about making that clear in Beijing last December.
Politically, European leaders will not be able to tolerate that our industrial base is undermined by unfair competition. We like competition. It makes us better. It lowers prices. It's good for the consumers, but competition needs to be fair.
Beijing has hinted that pressure from the US is the real reason behind the policy U-turns.
In recent years, in order to deprive China of its development rights and maintain its own hegemony, a certain country has overextended the concept of national security and politicized and instrumentalized economic, trade, and technological issues. Even at the expense of the interest of its allies, it has coerced and induced some countries to impose export restrictions on China.
The working people who built this country.
In the US itself, the pushback started years ago during the Trump administration and has continued under President Biden. In March, the House of Representatives passed a bill requiring the sale of social media platform TikTok by its China-based owner ByteDance, or face an outright ban in the US.
Have you ever been a member of the Chinese Communist Party?
Senator, I'm Singaporean. No.
Have you ever been associated or affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party?
No, Senator. Again,
Okay.
I'm Singaporean.
The forced sale has been described by Chinese media as an assault on free speech and bullying. But China banned multiple US online platforms, including YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, more than a decade ago. So how valid are the accusations of China bashing or Sinophobia? And where does this leave the EU stuck in the middle between its two biggest trading partners?
Have you ever applied for American citizenship?
No, not yet.
Well, let's meet our guests. In Berlin, we have Dr. Chen. He is Assistant Professor in Global Media and Information Law. In Beijing, Einar Tangen is Senior Fellow at the Taihe Institute. And here in the studio with me, we have Russon. She is a technology journalist. Einar, welcome to Roundtable. I'll come to you first. How much of a balancing act is this for Europe? You know, the need for Chinese investment in Chinese technology, and yet the United States seems to have an issue with Europe kind of reaching out too much to China.
Well, I think above the technology and investment, what we're really talking about is markets. Germany and much of Europe depends on having someplace they can sell their advanced goods. And China has the largest market out there. Last year, China grew its disposable income by over 6.2%. That gives you an idea that even during challenging times, China seems to be forging ahead. So at this point, it's this idea about security, which might go away. Donald Trump has basically indicated he doesn't like NATO, he doesn't like the Grand Alliance, and he certainly does not like Europe. He was perturbed because when he lost, Europe celebrated. So things could change dramatically depending on who is in the office next year.
Chen, is Europe right to be concerned about security when it comes to Chinese tech? This is what we hear the whole time, whether it's mobile phones, smartwatches, even e-vehicles now. People in Europe are, certainly governments, seem to be suspicious of Chinese tech. Do they have a point?
Sure. This year, we're probably witnessing a most crucial juncture in the historical perspective, namely that many countries, including Europe and the US, are facing general elections. And is going to be the time in which Europe will no longer feel so relaxed, let's say, as it used to feel, even during the pandemic and during the initial stage of the Ukrainian war. Europe used to rely heavily on Chinese technologies, still relying heavily on Chinese technologies, including green technologies and some of the key sectors such as solar panel manufacturing. And recently, we also see a very controversial debate on the wide use of TikTok that many countries in the world, including the US and Europe, European Union, are considering a total ban of TikTok itself, particularly on government devices. So yes, it is a very grave concern that many countries are now having with regard to the use of Chinese technologies.
And Chen, it's quite a difficult conversation, I would imagine, because all these countries, they also want Chinese investment at the same time, don't they?
Yes, they do. And that is why we are facing we were facing a very crucial stage of geopolitical tensions, because when Europe used to feel quite comfortable in navigating the use or engagement with Chinese technologies while dealing comfortably with the US, now Europe would need to make a difficult decision whether to counter the Chinese technologies or to stand along with the US, probably in withstanding authoritarian influence of the use of Chinese technologies, particularly in the field of the protection of privacy, let's say, or free speech. That is going to be a very difficult debate.
Marianne, it's a fascinating conversation, this, isn't it? I mean, Chinese tech is everywhere. The watch I wear when I run is Chinese made. All these countries are very suspicious of China, but they're desperate for their investment as well. How do European countries and the European Union now navigate this path, trying to get the investment in and trying not to upset the Americans at the same time?
I mean, I can only speak from a tech perspective, so I can't really tell you what policymakers are likely to do. I can tell you based on experience what they tend to do, and that may not be a very pragmatic thing, but I think it really depends on who geopolitically is in power and what they're insisting upon. But if you look at it, Washington and the White House have had a long history of insisting and trying to manipulate countries, particularly Five Eyes nations at the very first start. Obviously, UK, Australia, New Zealand, trying to, first of all, influence them to boycott certain technologies. And they've been doing this for a long time whenever it is something that's against US interests. So I would say that given the US is still a key political power, and we may even have Trump coming back, I think that this sort of maneuver will see the same that we saw before. From 2016 onwards with Trump, we will see very likely protectionist sort of stuff. But I think it's very important from a tech point of view to look at, is the technology actually dangerous? And to this day, the UK government may have, asked Huawei, asked the UK mobile operators to remove Huawei kit from their core networks, even though they were told by multiple people in the telecom industry. All of the mobile operators complained and said there is nothing in the core network, that we're using that is particularly sensitive. And also mobile networks don't know that way. They don't connect across in one contiguous line that you can just spy across a whole network that consists of thousands of different pieces from different manufacturers and different software all together, and somehow you could do one lot of spying. To this day, it's impossible to prove that there was any spying with Huawei. So if you're going from a standpoint of you can't actually prove it, then surely the only thing politically they're doing is they're just trying to appease the biggest, I suppose, dog in the group, I suppose, the biggest watchdog. I don't really feel that there's a good way of navigating it per se. I think it's murky waters depending on whoever's in power. So it's more of a subjective decision rather than based on any fact or reality.
Einar, is there a danger here that the European Union will get bullied by the United States? That, you know, policy is coming from across the Atlantic and Europe is being told what to do? Because a lot of European countries will look at Chinese investment and think, yes, please.
Well, you keep talking about investment, but you know, where is Europe going to sell? And that's a huge issue. I mean, China's a massive market, as I was pointing out before. But I completely agree with Marianne. This is politics over science. The technology is not there. I mean, Great Britain can attest to that. They were the ones who said, no, we passed all the Huawei stuff. There's nothing there. We don't need to get rid of it. And there was a screaming match going on a teleconference with people pounding the table in Washington saying, you're either with us or against us. And that is the prevailing Washington view. In terms of what the reality is, go back to 2013. Look up Der Spiegel. They did a huge expose on the American intelligence system, which had revealed that they were not only bugging the software and getting the backdoor keys to all the things made in the US, but they were also putting malware that gave them backdoors on routers, computers, hard drives. And this isn't me talking, this is Der Spiegel. It was never refuted by the Chinese government, by the US government. And then we have, the revelations that were made subsequently, by whistleblowers who are now been vilified, exposing that the US does act unilaterally without regard to law, and then turns around and accuses other people of spying and of disregarding the rule of law. I mean, it's a clever thing. You flip the script. You accuse people of doing exactly what you're doing.
Chen, what would you say to people who would argue that it's all well and good Chinese companies getting big infrastructure contracts across Europe for billions and billions of dollars, but no European companies would get the same opportunity in China, would they?
Not necessarily, because on the one hand, China is trying to export many of its over surplus products to the European markets, and it also wants certain key technologies from its European partners. However, the European companies might face a difficult time in China at this moment because the Chinese government is also tightening its ideological control on not only on domestic companies, but also on transnational companies as well. We are witnessing, as I said, an era in which there is the clash of political civilizations. And at the same time, we saw the clash of different technologies with different legal effects, such as the Brussels effect, or Beijing effect, or Washington effect. And all these things, all these factors are coming together at a time, making all things very complicated for decision makers and legislators as well.
Just looking at you there, Einar, you're disagreeing strongly.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like talk points coming from the State Department. I mean, quite frankly, this idea that China is selling off excess baggage when it's exporting the leading edge technology just doesn't ring true. The reason that European companies don't do well in China is because they cannot offer the package. It's too expensive. I mean, you can't compete.
Why can't they compete?
Why? Because the wages are higher. To develop something in Europe costs more. That's why most of the European companies, the major ones that you're talking about, in order to stay abreast, they are opening up research and development centers in China. There we have it. So, this is a situation where we're talking about human resources. That's the real power between AI, and also technology. And China has more of it. And it used to be the US did when they were welcoming to people. But now, the US is not very welcoming to anybody they don't consider white and privileged. So at this juncture, the US is digging its own grave. In terms of Europe, they have to make a decision. Do they want to stick with with America, who is offering them nothing, or do they want to explore not working with China in per se, but working with the global South? I mean, this is the issue. I mean, Europe has a bad tradition to overcome in terms of the colonialism, where they basically took the riches from, the developing world. I mean, India, before the Europeans moved in, before the British moved in, they had 24% of the world's GDP. After the British left, it was down to 4%. And this is a pattern that has been repeated throughout the global South. And Europe has to make a decision to say, look, we want to engage with the rest of the world, or we want to cling to the coattails of America.
Wow, Marianne, I read a story recently in the newspapers in London, and it was a warning to government and MPs that China wants to sell a lot of electric vehicles in Europe, and in particular in the UK. And the warning was that these vehicles' data could be harvested and sent back to China. The vehicles could be stopped. If relations between the two countries deteriorated, these vehicles could even be stopped on the road. I mean, it all sounds very science fiction-like. Is that fair assessment?
It is. This goes back to my point about what we were saying earlier about the telecommunications. I'd like to see them actually manage to do that. I'm pretty sure that's against the law here to import and sell a vehicle here that runs here where data gets sent back to China. Like, doesn't that go against, I'm pretty sure that goes against...
I'm sure it does, but that's what they think.
Yeah.
That's what they think.
Well, yeah, but what politicians know about technology is like next to nothing. In all honesty, like from working previously at the BBC and sitting in and watching huge numbers of MP select committee hearings, having these poor British telecoms engineers who work for Huawei standing there repeatedly saying, it doesn't work that way. The telecom equipment it doesn't work that way. The amount of times I've seen select committee hearing of any kind of thing that involves sending data back to China or something of that ill, and for them to say, but the technology doesn't work that way. I think you have to compare apples with apples and oranges with oranges. And if we kind of need our government to actually understand something about some technology before they could start regulating it. But that's probably a problem all over the world, right? But the key thing is, it is unlikely that data is going to be allowed to be sent back to Chinese servers in the first place if it's on electronic vehicles, and that's second by second, minute by minute. You really, to make electronic, electric vehicles work, to enable 5G self-driving cars, you're going to need to have the servers and all of the computer infrastructure as close to the car as possible. It has to be based within the country. And many countries are now talking about sovereign cloud. They want to have their own cloud computing servers, their own data centers based in their country. So I think going forward, it is extremely unlikely. And if anybody tried, it would be found out and they would be vilified by society very quickly. It would be not a smart move, I would say.
Chen, is there a narrative against Chinese tech then in Europe? Would you say that's a fair point?
Well, currently there is a narrative about that. Many politicians, as well as a lot of human rights activists and NGOs, are creating this sort of narrative. Well, they're not creating, but this is certainly the narrative that they have been endorsing over a long course of time, namely that the Chinese government is trying to use the influence of its technologies to change certain geopolitical relations, including with European countries. So the European Union has received a lot of warnings now, and it is also giving quite a few warnings to the companies in Europe that using the Chinese technologies might affect, in the long run, certain considerations regarding national security and economic security in Europe.
Einar, what did you think of that story that was in the British papers about the possibility, they claim, that Chinese-made electric vehicles could be stopped mid-journey, could have data harvested and sent back to China. I mean, what's your reading of that? Where is this anti-China narrative coming from?
Well, it's coming from the U.S. I mean, in the Department of Defense receives $90 billion a year, which would make it the third largest, defense budget after the U.S. first and China second, to do information gathering and disinformation. So yes, it's clearly coming from the U.S. They push it in a narrative that is often, echoed by the press. But listen to what Marianne has just told you. If you look at the science, it's damn near impossible. Do you know how much information would have to be flowing back to China? You think that could really be, undetected? I mean, it's nonsense. I mean, recently you had Secretary Raimondo come out and say having Chinese e-vehicles is like having Apple phones around. And I thought this was a very curious. She didn't seem to understand very much about the comparison, but equating the danger of the two was just kind of interesting. This is my point, and I agree completely with her. I talked to many politicians. They have absolutely no idea. They listen to science fiction. They have these absurd ideas that these things can happen, and they don't listen when the scientists tell them, look, it's just not possible. Instead, they just say, well, it must be possible because, the Americans told us so. So, if it's repeated enough on the internet, I have to believe it. This is the problem. I mean, we have the same thing with vaccines.
And Einar, I just want to pick up on something as well. Richard Dearlove is the former head of the British spy agency MI6. He's quoted recently as calling for Chinese EVs to be banned from sensitive national infrastructure sites and that no government cabinet ministers should be driving them. What's your take on what he's claiming?
Well, you could say the same thing about Tesla or any other electronic car. I mean, it's any vehicle today, all right? You can monitor it. You can figure out where it's going. And if you know where it's going and there's any cameras in the car, you can tell who was there and who was coming in and out. Now, the Chinese did the same thing. They said they didn't want Teslas at the things because Tesla was gathering information. It wasn't processing it outside the United States, but there was this concern that processing it within China, that information could be sent out. Now, this is always a danger. I'm not saying that there's nothing that could happen, but to the kind of scale that we're talking about and the kind of paranoia that's being pushed, I mean, this is really part of the democratic process. We can't tell you the good things we'll do, but we'll tell you why you should not elect the other party because they're dangerous. Fear rather than hope seems to be the message these days. And technology is easy because very few people understand it.
Good, Chen. At what point do you think relations between the European Union and China might improve?
Well, certainly we know that quite a few European countries still rely heavily on the Chinese market, including Germany itself. So Germany is not going to simply, for example, give a full ban on TikTok like the US. Many European countries do have their own standpoints, quite a little bit different from that of the US. So there is an opportunity for the EU-China relationship still to go back a little bit, but it's very hard, also given the current political situation and the upcoming US election. If, let's say, Trump is going to be elected again, then probably Europe is going to be go in a direction that following the US administration. So it's very hard to say, but I doubt that the EU-China relationship will go back quickly to what it used to be like.
Marianne, do you think we'll ever see a day in Europe where TikTok gets banned?
I ideally hope that won't be the case, but I do think that if the wrong people say the wrong thing to whoever is in power in the US, there will be efforts to do that. But simply their issue is just that China has now one of the world's top social media apps that are used by young people, when it was just when America had all of the top social media apps used by young people, that was just fine.
That was cool.
Despite the fact that they've caused bullying, untold psychological and mental health impacts, teenage suicide, that was all fine as long as it was owned by a Western company. If you watch the poor Senate hearing, right, and the CEO of TikTok is like, I'm from Singapore. You know, I could tell you a long story of, you know, I'm essentially an overseas Chinese person, right? I'm a British-born part Chinese person. That makes me very different from a Chinese person or a Singaporean Chinese person or a Jamaican Chinese person. And the poor Singaporean chap was the CEO saying, I'm not, he said, what's your link to China? He says, I'm not even from there. I'm from Singapore. It's another country which has Chinese people in it.
Yeah.
You know, so do we just hate things because they're Oriental then? You know, like they come from some kind of Oriental country?
There's very definitely a narrative, as we've discovered. Marianne, thank you. And to Gu Chen and Einar as well, thank you both very much. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me and Brady and all of the Roundtable team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.